My name is Ian and welcome to Planted. In this video we fix up my greenhouse and prepare it for winter. As we move out of the growing season, it's time to get this greenhouse working properly, and I have a gap at the back of the greenhouse that lets the cold air in, so we have to fix that. And then we'll be looking at digging up those tender plants, giving them a prune, putting them in a new pot so that they can move into the greenhouse ahead of the colder weather. Let's go. A fully functioning greenhouse is, I think, the most valuable tool you can have in a garden. Particularly here in the northeast, we get cold winters, lots of wind, and my greenhouse has had lots of storms come by, and it's shaken the frame and just pulled the frame a quarter inch off the wall. Here you can see that little bit of flex, and that lets the draft in. So what I need to do is drill some holes in the brickwork, add in a little wooden dowel, and then I can readily screw a marine plywood bracket and just apply some even tension. And that even tension will pull the frame to the wall. I can put in some sealer, and I have my greenhouse fixed and ready and raring to go. Take the time, do it now before you need it, because cold weather is around the corner. Any greenhouse must be able to vent, and I take my door off in the summer, and in the summer it doesn't matter because I don't have much in here. But as we move into winter, I need to make sure that my vent is fully functioning. And it's not uncommon for these to lose their seal, and it doesn't help that I had my Aristolochia growing through the vent. So do spend a little bit of time making sure that it has an open swing and it also closes in line. You don't want to rely on your vent to be working and it doesn't, and your greenhouse gets really hot. Or you expect it to close and it doesn't, and it stays open when it gets really cold. So I'm just taking a little bit of time here to prune out the plant that's in the way, and I can see now that it's fully functioning. Next up is to fit the door. Now, being as I'm an English gardener, I like plants to grow, so I don't go out of my way to be forever trimming and pruning. I want them to explode with colour and foliage and flower. And the Aristolochia did just that, so much so that I had to give it a really big haircut to get my door to fit. Now my door needs some new stainless steel hinges, but it's working nice. I'm able to put this back in place, make sure that it's sealed properly, and screw the hinges onto my greenhouse frame. And this means that I can just close it and it won't freeze inside. Just naturally it will stay warm in there at this time of year because we've got warm days and the nights aren't yet below freezing. But I cannot stress this enough. You need to do this before you need it. Don't wait until it's cold. Get these things up and running, and you will be able to start to add plants to your greenhouse, which is what I'm about to show you. When I start to pack up my garden for the winter, it's a very sad and yet at the same time very rewarding process. And I've done all sorts of different ways, and this is by far the best way for me. I identify 5 plants that are most susceptible to colder weather, and I go out and I cut back the foliage from 5 of those plants, then I lift those 5, and then I pot those 5 on. And that will take me probably an hour and a half. Here I'm taking the Aristolochia foliage away from the greenhouse because it's time to dig up that plant. And what this means is that I've got a bite-sized piece of work with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's very easy to know that you've finished. But before we get to that, have a look at this. This is the Aristellochia Flower. 8-9 inches top to bottom. That mottling and that pattern and that beautiful center color. This is a plant that completely impressed me this year. Very, very special. Anyway, so if this gets cold, it will not be happy. But look at the amount of foliage you put on in just a few months. And what I found the best way is to prune from the top down rather than pruning from the bottom up. And the reason I say that is that I can always go smaller, but I can't go bigger. If I cut it too short to start with, I'm in a bit of a pickle. So here I am clearing out the Aristolochia so I can see what I've got. Next up is the Alyogyne. This was bought this year. I put it in the ground just to have it on tick over. Then we've got the beautiful Cypress King Tut. Get in there and remove copious amounts of that foliage. It did incredibly well this year. Next year I'm going to give it a bit more space because it was so successful. Here we have a Gardenia that I put in the ground. So happy was this Gardenia that it rewarded me with 2 flowers. I was hoping for more like 22. But we'll give it a bit of a prune and it'll be lifted in no time. If ever you're starting to prune in your garden, there may be some other things that you can prune back and get rid of. Here I've got some dahlias that were pushed around by the weather. Cell-set tomato plant, we'll get rid of that. You can't imagine the amount of foliage that your garden puts on over the 6 months of summer. There we see a datura being moved, and this is the very nice Salvia Involocrata Bethalia. I had hoped this would be a little more striking. The hummingbirds did like it, but we're going to give that a bit of a haircut too. And the point I'm making here is that you can't do it all at once. You've got to start and do it in the right order. I have a potting table I bring out. I get a nice bag of planting mix and a variable size of pots. And I try and get in the habit of whenever I dig up a plant, I don't quite know how big the root ball is going to be, but I don't want to pick it up, the root ball collapse, and I've got nowhere to put it. So I have a guess as to how big it will be, and I get in the habit of putting a pot next to it. This means that if I have success and my plant comes out in a nice stable root ball, I can pick it up, put it in that pot. And it's not that that's the pot it will go into. It means that I can now safely carry it to my potting table without it further collapsing. This cypress is very, very rugged. I can be quite rough and tough with this plant because it's very, very difficult to kill. When this gets dug out of the ground, it's going to be a mass of roots, and this did not in any way surprise. The spade I'm using is a trenching spade. It's longer by about 6 inches and it's narrower by about 6 inches. And it means that I can change the angle that I dig in the ground to maximize the root ball I'm planting. And here you can see a great big clump of Cypress King Tut. Next we've got the Gardenia. Now this is a very special plant. Lots of people grow this. Not many of them grow it in the ground, particularly in New England because it's not hardy. But look at that for a mess of roots. Very happy with that. And you see how it only just about fits in that pot. And then we move on to the Aristolochia. You can't save a huge amount of foliage. If there's one trick here, it's prune the plants probably harder than you think and put them in a smaller pot, because that means that it's easier for that plant to overwinter. If it's got less above ground growth and a slightly smaller root ball that's been pruned maybe, a really good potting mix, it'll grow just as well with less stress and less risk of it drying out through excess foliage. So although I'm being very rough here, I know exactly what it is that I want, and that is I want all the roots from my Aristolochia, and I want a framework that will allow the plant to put on new growth, and that's what I have right there. And I've got the label, which is an added bonus. This is a beautiful vine called Pandorea, and I put it in here hoping it would grow up the Arundinodonax. One branch did, but the area got so dark and so dense that it had a tough life. So we're going to get that potted up and give it a prune, and it'll be wonderful for us next year once we've taken it through the winter. The reason I like my table is that I'm actually working at waist height. I'm not bent over with backache, and I'm probably going to give my plants more care and attention if I'm comfortable doing this potting on job. So I pruned back my 5 plants. I've got my 5 plants on the table, and now it's time to start potting them on. This mix has got the beneficial fungus called mycorrhizae. It's very important. Do a search. I'm a big proponent of mycorrhizae. Not all mycorrhizae is the same, but it helps the plant extract nutrients from soil. And something I do is my range of pots allows me to get the perfect pot for the perfect plant. I could put this Pandorea in a bigger pot. I'm not going to. This is just the right size because I'm going to give it quite a heavy haircut. I make sure that I've got the center of the plant in the center of the pot, and I've also got it at the right height. And here you can see me pruning off lots of excessive growth. A little bit of a shake, press around the edges. Number one plant done. Next up is the Alyogyne. This is going to get a much better spot next year. It looks as if there's some backfill that's come up around the crown. You want to make sure that you don't plant things too deep. Let's look at our little pot mix and see what would be the ideal size. Yeah, that black pot's just a little small. So we'll go up and use the green pot. I like to add some garden soil to my potting mix. I find that it makes it easier to water, and it's just a little less extreme. It's not too wet and it's not too dry. Here you can see me taking time to set it at the right height, and then with my mix of garden soil and potting mix, which could be 10 to 1, 10 lots of potting mix to 1 of garden soil. It could be a bit more than that, but I just find this is the perfect mix. There we are again, centered and at the right height. Now I want to reduce the foliage here, because when you cut the roots, you're reducing the plant's ability to take up moisture, and if you leave a heavy crown, it can dry out. Here we are moving on with our mix of garden soil and potting mix for the Aristolochia. Got to be careful, lots of roots there, and I want to get that in the pot as quick as I can and not have it have any more shock. This has got a little bit of moisture. It's not overly wet. I would not be doing this potting on this way in the springtime, but because it's in the fall or the autumn, I don't want that pot to become a soggy cold mess that's overwatered. I'll cut this back, prune it, put it in the greenhouse, and in a day or two I'll give it a little bit of water. But I don't want it too wet, too cold soon. Let's mix up some more of our blend for the Gardenia. Now this is how it lifted out of the ground. Root pruning, some people swear by it, others dismiss it completely. I'm probably on the fence. If there's a plant like this where I can easily get to the roots, I'll give it a bit of a prune. But if you prune the roots, you must also prune the head. Now that I've got the roots pruned, I can choose a better size pot. Let's see if this is the right size. Yeah, it's just a little too small. What you want is an inch or an inch and a half extra diameter all the way around. Anything smaller, you'll end up with voids because you can't get the pot and median there. Anything bigger, and it gets clumpy and heavy and will take up too much space in the greenhouse. So there's another reason for reducing the root ball size, reducing the crown size. You get a smaller planted pot, and you can put more of them in your greenhouse. And as you know, I have no space. I will probably end up with 50 to 55 plants in my greenhouse, so size is of the essence. And anytime I can prune the crown down, that's exactly what I will do, because it will give me more space. This is our very beautiful Cypress King Tut. This plant is smaller than the species. King Tut is a selected clone that's not quite so vigorous, but it grew beautifully. Now I want to point out to you here that should you so wish, you could break off a little small side shoot, and that's what you could grow through the winter, and that would give you this plant for next year. Don't be afraid to cut this particular plant back. And there would be your little plant that you could stick in a pot, and you'd be off to the races. Alternatively, you could divide that whole clump, and you could probably get 20 or 30 individual plants if you had space for it. But I like to have a large plant to give me a big splash. So we choose the appropriate size pot and get the plant set at the right height, add our somewhat dry mix, give it even more of a pruning, and this makes it much, much easier to handle. And that's it. There we have our Cypress King Tut. I can't wait to give that space next year and let it thrive. So let me just show you the purpose and the practice of potting on a little side shoot like this. Get the right size pot. Don't be tempted to give it the biggest pot you can. It's a waste of space and it's a waste of resources. With a plant like this, I don't want the roots to spiral, so we can trim those back slightly. And that will just get set with the roots splayed on all sides. And we add our backfill. And we have ourselves a little baby King Tut that will probably get given to somebody that walks by the garden and is very excited to see what the garden has to offer. And that's it. 5 plants pruned, 5 plants dug up, 5 plants potted, and 5 plants put into the repaired greenhouse. It's a sad day, it's a slow day, but it's the beginning of the end of this year, and it's the beginning of the adventures for next year. Only keep the best plants. So get out there, dig something up, and let's grow plants together.